Sweden's identity as a humanitarian superpower is under attack. It has proudly taken in more refugees per capita than any other European country.
Sweden has accepted a lot of refugees. They've accepted hundreds of thousands of refugees, and they're a country with only 10 million people. Mainly, this new wave of migrants comes from North Africa and the Middle East, countries like Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and Eritrea. A key question, though, is why? Why has Syria accepted so many refugees, more per capita than any other country in Europe? The official reason was referenced at the start of this video. Sweden considers itself a humanitarian superpower, and they think it's right to try and help these people, to try and help the refugees. In this video, I'm going to present an alternate theory, though, that explains why the Swedes are admitting so many migrants. I'll call this theory the selfish theory. Here's the Swedish Prime Minister, Reinfeldt, in 2014 laying out the basic argument in support of the official reason why Sweden is admitting so many migrants. What he's saying here, if I can summarize him, is that the refugees have seen horrible things, and Sweden can help them. Even though it will be expensive to help the refugees, Sweden will be able to build a better world by doing it. So Sweden should take on this moral obligation and help the refugees. It seems like a nice idea, doesn't it? This is the official explanation for why Sweden takes so many migrants. I think the typical Swede probably does buy into this line of thinking. Here's a typical Swede, Annika Norrie, with 2 Afghani refugees that she takes care of. A story in Public Radio International, linked in the description, describes how Norrie takes care of the 2 boys and is helping them to try to get the rest of their family to come to Sweden. In the article, she says that, quote, "We Swedes opened our hearts," end quote, meaning the Swedes opened their hearts to let the 2 boys come into the country, quote, and then all of a sudden closed them. That is inhumane, end quote. By closing hearts, she means that the Swedish people decided to hesitate in admitting the rest of the family of those 2 Afghani boys. Reading Annika's Facebook page, she seems very genuine in her compassion for the 2 boys. In one argument with a person who wants to send refugees back, Annika describes how it would feel to her to have to send the 2 boys she's taking care of back. These boys are basically like her own children, and she'd have to send them back to a dangerous and foreign place like Afghanistan. If you have a human heart, I think you can understand her point. Annika Norrie and the typical Swede may very well be genuine about wanting to help refugees purely out of the kindness of their own heart and to do what's best for those refugees. However, I have my doubts that the leadership of the government in Sweden is as genuine as people like Norrie. The Center for Immigration Studies issued a report that found this, quote, "For what it costs to resettle 1 Middle Eastern refugee in the United States, about 12 refugees can be helped in the Middle East," end quote. Presumably, this 12-to-1 figure would be even greater when considering a place like Sweden instead of the US, as Sweden has a higher cost of living than the US. To reiterate what the report is saying, for the cost of helping 1 refugee in a Western country like Sweden, you could instead provide similar assistance to 12 refugees if you resettled them into neighboring countries like Turkey, Jordan, or Lebanon. That's because these countries have a lower cost of living and they're closer. So ask yourself, if you were a big-hearted Swede who just wanted to help people out, would you A, help relatively few people by moving them all the way around the world to a foreign place with a foreign culture, foreign people, foreign languages, a foreign education system, foreign religion, foreign economy, etc., or would you choose to help 12 times as many people by assisting them in their relocation to a relatively similar place as the place where they were from? That is a place with a similar people, similar population, similar languages, similar culture, similar religion, similar education, similar economy, etc. If you were a big-hearted person, which of these 2 choices would you make?
The Grinch's small heart grew 3 sizes that day.
Did the Swedes just not think of resettling refugees into neighboring countries? Did they not realize how much more efficient that might be? Or maybe, just maybe, there's something else going on. In my mind, the fact that the Swedes are being very inefficient in their generosity, essentially helping 1 person instead of 12, this fact is fatal to their official narrative. So there must be something else going on other than pure generosity, other than pure benevolence. I call this interpretation of what's happening the selfish hypothesis, because I'm going to hypothesize that the Swedish government is actually resettling refugees in Sweden for selfish, but also ultimately bad reasons. This is a visualization of Sweden's 2020 budget projections. The data comes from their government's website. You may notice that 4 of the largest categories are items 9, 10, 11, and 12, which I've circled. And these spending categories spend money to take care of people who need financial assistance. These are disproportionately elderly or unemployed people. So, for example, the category of medical care and social services will disproportionately go towards the not working elderly, because elderly people get sick more frequently than younger people. These categories that I've circled make up 30% of their spending. So if the portion of society that needs this kind of assistance increases, then these categories will have to either expand or the services offered by these categories will contract. And, of course, all the categories on this graph have to be funded by the Swedish taxpayer. This brings us to Sweden's aging population. In this chart, we see the average age of the Swedish population from 1968 to 2016, and we see it's going up. That is, the average Swede is getting older. Their population is aging. You may also notice that this trend levels out around the time that Sweden is admitting large numbers of refugees who are typically younger. In the 1990s, not only was Sweden's population aging, but it was also on net declining by 5,000 to 10,000 people a year. So their population is aging and it's diminishing. And what this means is ultimately that there are fewer taxpayers and more people, the retired elderly, who need government assistance. In other words, their spending is on track to increase. More retired people, more old people who will need more government services. Meanwhile, their revenue is on track to decrease because fewer people are being born, fewer people will become taxpayers in the future. That's a bad combination. Here we see a graph from a paper that was published in the Demographic Research Journal. This graph describes the decline of the fertility of Swedish women, starting with a peak in the early 60s near 2.5 children per woman and ending in the 1990s below 1.6 children per woman. Replacement rate for Sweden. Replacement rate meaning the number of children per woman that a population needs in order to remain stable. The replacement rate is around 2.08. So that means if you have more births per woman, then the population will expand, and less births per woman, less than 2.08, the population will contract. And Sweden's rate of births per woman is much less than needed to even be stable. It's below 1.6. Their population will shrink, and as we discussed before, it will shrink in terms of incoming people. Fewer children being born, their population will age. Fewer children being born, fewer taxpayers, the population gets older, more government services required. This is Sweden's fundamental problem. Fewer people being born, declining population, less taxpayers, better medicine, better medical care means people live longer, more older people, more assistive services, more expensive medicine. You're paying more for older people to live longer and longer. So you've got expanding costs in terms of government services and dwindling income. In other words, the basic model of a big government services country like Sweden, the basic model is becoming untenable when there are more people consuming services, the not working elderly, and fewer people funding them. The number of taxpayers is diminishing just because fewer people are being born. The number will diminish in the future further. So how can Sweden solve this basic fundamental problem? They need more people. And what if there were lots of people somewhere looking for a country to move to? Then Sweden can admit large numbers of migrants. And incidentally, they admitted far more migrants per capita than any other country in Europe between 2008 and 2016. These migrants become taxpayers, increasing the government's income. The refugees are also more fecund than native Swedes. Muslim women from the Middle East and North Africa tend to average a little more than 3 children per woman. So this way, the Swedish government hopes to boost their population growth over the coming generations, admit more people, and the new people have more children. Officials in Sweden's government, including their prime minister, would say that Sweden wants to admit many migrants because it's morally right to do so, because they want to help the migrants. However, as I've pointed out in this video, if they really wanted to help migrants, they'd be resettling larger numbers of them, up to 12 times as many, in neighboring countries where the migrants would have a similar culture they could assimilate into more easily. Instead, Swedes are importing migrants into their country. And to explain that, I think you need to look a little bit deeper than what Sweden's politicians are saying. I think you need to realize that Sweden needs a growing population in order to fund their expenditures, in order to fund their expensive services for their aging population. A report from the Migrant Integration Policy Index ranks Sweden as the #1 country out of 38 in terms of integrating migrants into their society. Sweden is clearly committing a lot in terms of money and political capital to bring in large numbers of migrants into their country and try to integrate them into their society. And I think the way to understand this is not purely as a labor of love, but as a self-interested move to save their own economy and social order by bringing in new, younger people to broaden their tax base and pay for their expanding set of social services. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by clicking the like button. If you want to see more content in a similar style, go ahead and subscribe. Coming up next, I intend to go into more detail about migrants integrating into Swedish society. Here's a preview for you. I don't think it'll work very well for Sweden. The sources for this video are in the video description. Thanks for your time.